Welcome to the Sherman Report. Here's Peter Sherman.
Good evening. The Sherman Report for Tuesday, and what a Tuesday it's yet to be. I know we Canadians are supposed to be more concerned with Trudeau than Trump, but Trump is never boring. Trudeau, Point is that tonight it's Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump in a debate that well may be their only one, and in a matchup where the two opponents have not so much as met, ever. Last week, Andy Stinton and I chattered away about whether being on the Trump side or discussing the American election with someone who was on the opposing side created enemies out of friends. I have friends myself who I maintain as friends because I know when they're getting irritated. They are generally my left of center friends, and I am a right of center guy. Have you ever noticed that left of center people can't have that kind of discussion because they get angry, whereas right of center people don't? We just say something like, whatever, and then we have another shot of bourbon or scotch or another beer, whatever. There will be a lot of non-voters looking at the election debate tonight from Canada, partly because the United States affects us as neighbors so greatly, and because we find it very interesting and entertaining, which it really is not supposed to be entertaining, but it is, and partly because it is that entertaining when compared to our debates, which are not quite as boring as batshit. Close, though. I'll be talking about the debate in a moment. More about the debate that is already started. Also about swing states, and the Electoral College that's used as part of the system in the United States. These are peculiarities of the American system, but they're important if you want to understand it. And what about an NDP candidate in a Montreal federal by-election who thought a photo of himself flanked by a Palestinian flag was a good idea? And conservatives want to know how an ISIS member got into Canada and made plans to then go to the United States, where he intended to slaughter Jews in Brooklyn, New York. All ahead on the Sherman Report.
Now, the Sherman Report continues.
I decided to do a little research on some things that were bothering me about that American election. I'll share them with you in a couple of moments, but first, full disclosure, if I had a vote, it would be for Donald Trump. That is a minority view in Canada. I know it is, but I'm my own person, and I don't care whether anyone likes him or not. Elections are not about who you like. They're about who might keep you out of danger, keep business going well. But we're all aware of the way the world is today, and awareness we should keep top of mind. Someone asked me yesterday if I was a Trumper, and I said that to me a Trumper is like a thumper. Got to get out there and bang the drum, yell at non-believers, defend court appearances, all of that stuff. I don't view those things that way. I just look at the candidates and what they represent, and I couldn't care less about whether they're nice people. I'm never going to know anyway. I care about whether purported leaders can lead. So I looked up a few things going back to the 2020 election, where there was, at inception, a huge Democratic field of candidates. On the other side, just as now, there was only Donald Trump. So if I go back in the Democratic nomination process and I look alphabetically at who was there, I'm going to run down these quickly. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, former Vice President Joe Biden, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, Montana Governor Steve Bullock, South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Julian Castro, former Maryland Congressman John Delaney, former Alaska Senator Mike Gravel, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, Hawaii Representative Tulsi Gabbard, she led of the Trump campaign, California Senator Kamala Harris, Washington Governor Jay Inslee, Miramar, Florida Mayor Wayne Messam, former Texas Representative Beto O'Rourke, former Ohio Representative Tim Ryan, independent Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, former Pennsylvania Representative Joe Sestak, California Representative Eric Swalwell, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, author and New Age spirituality promoter Marianne Williamson, entrepreneur Andrew Yang, former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick, former hedge fund manager Tom Steyer, former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg. You'll see later why I decided to name all 27 of those initial candidates. 27 candidates who started out in that race. Only one could make it, and that one was to be Joe Biden. At the end of the primaries and the caucuses, there would be a choice of a nominee. The vast majority of states had chosen Biden. 6 states chose Bernie Sanders. No states chose Kamala Harris, who never made it to that point. Joe Biden did that all by himself. Harris didn't show up in the primary vote tabulations enough to even make them count. She was initially said to be a high-profile candidate, but she withdrew her candidacy in early December of 2019, 11 months prior to the election. That matters. 11 months before the election? She cited lack of funds as the reason, but she endorsed Joe Biden on March 8, 2020. Harris was chosen as vice presidential running mate by Biden in August of that year, 3 months before the election, which of course he won and she became vice president. Here's why I don't like the idea of a Harris presidency. First, I don't know who asked or told Joe Biden that he could not continue his candidacy, but he announced he wouldn't to the nation, not 48 hours after he'd announced he was going the distance. Am I to believe that the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, paid him a visit and pleaded with him not to run, and he said, "Oh, well, if you don't want me to, Nancy, then okay, I won't"? That's just crap. So what happened? Well, for me, there must be powers larger than we know about playing a major role in running the United States of America. Powers that see Trump as a threat to themselves. On the day Biden says he's dropping out, he selects Kamala Harris as the new presidential candidate. You know, the same Kamala Harris who couldn't raise enough money to maintain her presidential bid 4 years prior and never went through all the primaries and caucuses either time, then or in the past nominating season, not at all. And that's what bothers me. She didn't have to go through any of that because Biden did it, and in the end, she was anointed. Biden chose her, but it was not for him to make that choice, in my view. Legal scholars, however, said it was legal. The reason was that Biden had yet to be officially nominated at the Democratic National Convention. Remember when President Biden was called the presumptive nominee? Then he just handed that title over to Harris. If anyone disagreed, well, he or she could have mounted a challenge and taken it to the convention floor. But crickets, nada, zilch, nothing. No candidates, not a peep from thousands of Democratic Party members. Nowhere to be seen were those 27 wannabes. You might remember them. Biden had won the primaries, so Biden had the delegates. So Biden chose the nominee. Biden's election. Harris to win or lose. And that's the way it went. I repeat what I suggested earlier. I believe there are powers larger than we know playing a major role in running the United States of America. I can't prove it, but I do believe it. Kamala Harris seems bright. But without anything more than Biden choosing his vice president in 2020, and more recently, choosing his successor as presidential candidate, there is a person out there selling herself as competent to do that job, to guard the nuclear codes, to make incredibly complex decisions affecting life and death for many people in many places over the fullness of time. I don't like it. I also don't see leadership. And as objectionable as some of Donald Trump's mannerisms and actions are, and they are, I think he has the leadership stuff in him sufficient for me to vote for him if I had that vote. That said, I'll do what you're doing. I'll watch tonight's debate with great interest. Maybe I'll see something I've missed so far. And we'll all be talking about it tomorrow morning. I'll have a little more on American politics shortly and the change in statistics showing voter preference in terms of those statistics. First, I want to pay a little attention to things here at home where I'm not expecting any election anytime soon. 2 by-elections, though, on Monday, but a general election? Well, in 2025, certainly, and later into that year, I suspect. Back in just a moment.
Now, the Sherman Report continues.
Next Monday, there's a by-election in La Salle-Émard-Verdun, which is the Montreal constituency held by Justice Minister David Lametti, who has resigned, as you know. It once was the political home of Paul Martin, the Prime Minister. In other words, traditionally a liberal riding, not unlike Toronto-St. Paul's. That riding was a safe, liberal stronghold until it wasn't a few months ago. Now that Montreal by-election is underway and takes place on Monday, it's a topic of conversation because the NDP candidate named Craig Sauve has put out an election flyer that, in my view, has no place in any Canadian vote. It shows Mr. Sauve with a Palestinian flag superimposed behind him and an NDP logo up in the corner. It's in French, and it encourages voters to elect Sauve, and one of the reasons is to, quote, stop the genocide in Gaza. I spoke at length on yesterday's show about that war and what must happen. In a nutshell, Hamas will never capitulate, and that means Israel, the aggrieved party, will have to totally conquer the territory in Gaza to prevent further violence. There's nothing resembling a genocide there, just people who don't want Jewish people living side by side. They actually don't want Jewish people living at all. That would be the only genocidal tendency manifested in that war, but thankfully, Israel's military is a defense force, as its name implies, and it is indeed fighting defensively. Sauve has not done his homework. Here's what he doesn't get. If Israel lays down its arms, more Israelis die. If Hamas lays down its arms, more Gazans live. The pamphlet contains NDP demands, and they include the recognition of a Palestinian state and a two-way embargo on military trade with Israel. The Conservatives have rightfully drawn attention to this issue, despite not being the frontrunner in that by-election. Conservative Deputy Leader Melissa Lantsman, who was my guest here on Friday, called on NDP leader Jagmeet Singh to publicly defend the campaign materials. Her colleague, House Leader Andrew Scheer, asked, is this NDP candidate running in Canada? Did the NDP not want to put a Canadian flag on their flyers? The NDP put out this message, and I'm quoting, we have been crystal clear on our position in support of a ceasefire and the release of all hostages because we believe in protecting both Israeli and Palestinian lives, end of quote. The NDP is tone deaf. What I just said a moment ago is absolutely truthful. If Israel lays down its arms, more Israelis die. If Hamas lays down its arms, more Gazans live. By way of willingness, Israel has offered a two-state solution repeatedly and unilaterally with mediator nations, and it has always been rejected by those who speak for Gaza and the West Bank. The Gazans want a one-state solution, namely Israel, and they want all Jews in it dead. It doesn't get more stark than that, and the NDP just doesn't get it. The NDP wants Canada to take a tougher stance on Israel. They wanted a ceasefire way back when this thing began, within days of it. And let me be clear, when it began at the hands of Hamas murderers, Israel was not looking for any trouble. The Liberal government has stated that it wants a ceasefire, the release of the hostages still in Gaza, and a two-state solution. Justin Trudeau, I'm talking to you now. You can't have that because the other guys reject it. The Conservatives have supported Israel and its right to defend itself, and they have correctly stated that there is no genocide. The NDP loves that word. Smartly, the Bloc Québécois leader, Yves-François Blanchet, will not engage in politicizing the war in Gaza. No one should have. Since the La Salle-Verdun riding appears to have a two-way battle going between NDP and Bloc, that is wise on Blanchet's part on many levels, not least is the opportunity to take an old Liberal riding, and beyond that, to keep things in perspective as he seeks to exercise the balance of power he holds with the Trudeau Liberals once Parliament resumes. He has that in the wake of the NDP's decision to end their support and confidence agreement with Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. Back in one moment.
You're with the Sherman Report. Daily news commentary available at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, with video posted on YouTube and Facebook. Here's Peter Sherman.
Conservatives want to know how Muhammed Khan, an ISIS member, got into Canada and readied himself for entry into the United States, where he intended to slaughter Jews in Brooklyn, New York. This man was arrested last week because of police work undertaken by the RCMP and the FBI. The attack was supposedly to occur on October 7th, the anniversary of the initial Hamas murder rampage in Israel that set off the war still being fought. The court date for Khan in Montreal is Friday. The Conservatives wrote to the Parliamentary Committee on Public Safety asking that it look into this incident because there is, quoting, a pattern of ISIS-affiliated terrorists entering and residing in Canada. Good on the Conservatives. This worries me too. There's some fact and a lot of speculation rattling around. No one has announced exactly how Khan entered the country, but it may have been on a student visa. The Conservatives are skittish since police foiled a would-be terror attack in Toronto recently by a father and son. The 62-year-old father had obtained a temporary resident visa in 2018 and later became a Canadian citizen. And he's been charged with aggravated assault from a 2015 incident outside of Canada and related to serving ISIS. The Khan situation, however, is much more troubling. When you have Merrick Garland, the United States Attorney General, making announcements about something, you know it's serious. He said Khan was looking to slaughter, and that's his word, as many Jews as possible in New York City. Khan has been pinned to encrypted messages to co-conspirators who he warns against Islamic appearance and suggests they shave and seek to mimic the look of non-believers. Khan's communications were intercepted by the FBI and said this: if we're successful, this is going to be one of the largest attacks ever on Jews outside of the Israeli territory in recent times. He also said, our purpose is to sacrifice ourselves so that the Muslimin can wake up and support the state. The state means ISIS. The FBI said in mid-August, Khan gave notice to his Toronto landlord that he would be leaving. He applied for a credit card, which he received on September 1st. He warned his partners in crime to lay low and stay clear of social media. The FBI stated that there was a plan to create an ISIS-like video. Thankfully, the FBI was right on this, and Khan now faces 3 charges in Canada and extradition to the U.S., where he faces a single charge of attempting to provide material support and resources to a designated foreign terrorist organization, and he faces up to 20 years behind bars. Lovely story, right? This time, the would-be proponents of this plot had loose lips. Let's hope the next guys aren't any smarter. Quick break, then American Choice. Preference by the numbers.
You're with the Sherman Report. Daily news commentary live at 5 p.m. Video version live at X, YouTube, and Facebook. Here's Peter Sherman.
Oh, well, it's debate night. Need I remind you? You're going to be watching it, as am I, most of you anyway. Some interesting information that you should know about how the American system works. And let's begin by looking at poll numbers. Kamala Harris enjoyed the usual brief honeymoon candidates get from a well-presented nominating convention. To people watching, and I'll even include myself, we pay attention to enthusiasm, speakers list, the music played, the balloons, other accoutrements like that, acceptance speech, and everything else about the convention. And we conclude whatever we conclude. The Democratic National Convention in Chicago took place only about 3 weeks ago, and it dominated our TV screens. National polls show Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are about neck and neck in a just-published New York Times Siena poll. Actually, a slight edge for Trump, now standing at 48% compared to 47% for Harris. These results are virtually an identical set of numbers, with the same poll having been conducted in July, before the Democrats convened and just after President Biden withdrew from the race. The poll comes on the heels of renewed enthusiasm for the Harris takeover of the candidacy for president. The New York Times itself used this terminology. Trump's support is remarkably resilient. The poll suggests that Harris is not yet in the position where we can say she's closed the sale with voters who want to know her vision for the country. You know, the vision thing? 28% of respondents said they needed to know more about her to get their support. Only 9% voiced the same concern regarding Trump. I believe that tonight's debate will be the single most crucial element of this campaign for those who are wavering. It's not an overreach to say it'll probably be key to the voting day decision. The poll demonstrated some demographic improvement for Democrats following President Biden stepping aside. But Harris is not grabbing traditional Democrat strength from known supporters, for example, women and Latino voters. Harris must overcome voter preference for change because 60% show they want to see a winner who is not following Biden policies. 25% say Harris would not bring that level of change versus 53% who believe Trump would. Meanwhile, Harris is believed to be ahead in what's called critical enthusiasm. 91% of Democrats said they were enthusiastic to vote. Only 85% of Republicans said they were, a modest difference. But that is happening in an election where modest difference may likely be the ticket to success. So let me say this. Polls are entertaining and they're interesting regardless of who they favor, because all they are about really is sample size. You have a 350 million people universe. That's the population of the United States. And you're projecting all of those percentages based on fewer than 2,000 voters in a poll. I recall the Trump-Clinton election. The polls were completely out of whack with the result. And beyond that, Trump expected to lose and Hillary expected to win. Didn't happen that way. In fact, Hillary Clinton did have about 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, but lost because the Trump team played a strategic game by addressing so-called swing states. Both candidates are crisscrossing those swing states now repeatedly this time. Since my viewership is mostly Canadian, the swing states can go either way, and they are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Some people add in North Carolina and Nevada. Why are these states in that category? Because Trump won them in 2016 and Biden won them in 2020, i.e., they swing. Harris appears to be in front in all of those states, but by extremely tiny margins, fractions of percentage points, although Wisconsin looks a little more in favor of her than the others. Pennsylvania is perhaps the most essential component to all of this. The American system, remember, uses Electoral College votes, not direct votes by population, Electoral College votes, which are apportioned to states based on those states' populations. That means that the number of electoral votes by state is an absolute essential to achieve the number of Electoral College votes required to win, which is 270. So the point is this. It's not raw numbers. It's Electoral College votes by state as determined by numerical vote within each state. I guess we're going to have to stay focused on this thing, folks. It is an American election, but it is also a world event, and it's on our doorstep. That's another Sherman Report, back tomorrow with more and a visit from our friend Andy Stinton. Have a good evening and enjoy the fireworks.
The Sherman Report, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the video version at YouTube, Facebook, and always at petersherman.com. Thanks for listening to the Sherman Report. If you'd like to connect with Peter directly, just go to petersherman.com.